Welcome to the Ephesiology Podcast and our series, Archaeology Meets Missiology, the mission of God in the records of time. Today, as always, we have Michigan Cooper, our resident ephesiologist, and I'm Andrew Johnson in Victoria, British Columbia. And Michael, we have a special podcast today in which it is a podcast about a symposium, a seminar that you led called Let the Stones Speak. So it's all attention is going to be on you today. Right? It's even more than normal. Less of me, more of you. Just your favorite thing. Spotlight on you, Michael. So Let the Stones Speak. We have been talking so much about what archaeology is bringing to us about missiology, the church, the history of the church, and frankly, telling us about Jesus. So Can you give us a slight snapshot into what we are about to play for everybody who happened to miss this seminar?
Yeah. It was a fun seminar to do, and of course, the research behind it is a lot of fun for me. So we're going to highlight 5 archaeological discoveries that are showing us something about the memory of Jesus in the early centuries of the church. And I find this fascinating, and I'll talk about this in the seminar. But I find it fascinating that we have this additional evidence. We're so focused sometimes, and I think rightly so. We're focused on the Bible, and the Bible is historical and it's authentic, and we can determine its veracity and all these things. But what is fascinating to me is that there is information outside of the Bible. And of course, there is other literary information, that we have outside of the Bible, but there's archaeological information too that tells us something about what the early church believed about Jesus. And so that's what this seminar is about. We're looking at 5 different locations, 5 different archaeological discoveries, all pointing to the way in which the early church talked about Jesus. And I think it tells us something important for us as we think about how we communicate who Jesus is. And I can summarize that in this way. We in our studies of Jesus that we call Christology, we often speak about an ontological Christology and a functional Christology. And I know those are heady terms, but to put it simply, a functional Christology is telling us something about what Jesus did. And we see that throughout the Gospels. An ontological Christology is telling us something about who Jesus is in his essence, in his being. And that's what we see. Well, actually, we see both of these.
I would almost think it would be both.
Yeah, we see both of these in the archaeological record, and it's just beautiful to see it. And so anyway, I don't want to make too much of it because everybody knows I'm enamored with archaeology these days.
I would say it's the shiny toy.
It is the shiny toy, but it's a lot of fun, and to be able to see the physical evidence and to talk about it, it is really something special for me.
This, for our listeners, one more thing before we launch into the podcast, launch into the seminar. I think it's fascinating. So when somebody, as yourself, does the work, does the research, and writes a book, right? It's the book, right? What's in the book is in the book. This is what you have worked for. It gets published, and we encourage people to go to Amazon or other places and buy it. However, once you hit publish on a book doesn't mean that the research has stopped. It doesn't mean that your interest has stopped. It doesn't mean that you can continue to learn more. It's just a book represents what was done at that time. And so I think this is fun because some of the work that you present in the seminar is things that didn't show up in the book, things that were found afterwards, some new information. So if you, our readers, think this, or listeners, this is a lame plug to talk about a seminar covering everything you've already heard, I'm just letting you know it's not all the same. It's new, it's good, and it is worth your time. So please give a listen to Michael. So listen up, let's enjoy this. And this is Dr. Cooper's seminar, Let the Stones Speak.
It's been a real joy to have the privilege of traveling around to different parts of the world, looking at various archaeological sites and thinking about, why are these things important for us today? What are their implications for industry that we're a part of, wherever that might be, or what significance is there for even my personal life and my personal faith? And I hope that by the end of this evening that you'll get just a little taste of something that will assure you and affirm you in your faith. I mentioned that the title originally was "If the Stones Were to Speak," and I came to that title for a couple reasons. One is I am looking at rocks and marble stones and columns and these sorts of things, and oftentimes they have writings on them. And so, in a very real sense, those stones still speak. They teach us something. They tell us something about history, about the people whose names are on them, about the events that surrounded a particular situation or a city. It tells us something about the cities and the cultures themselves. And it is very interesting, not only from a historical point and an archaeological point, but also a missiological point. And of course, that's what my interest has been. What had inspired me to get involved in archaeology was wanting to put my hands on first, second, and third century pieces of material that would tell me that the Christian movement existed in this place. And over the past 3 years, it's been a joy to be able to walk in some of those places where the early disciples walked and literally put my hands on archaeological artifacts that testify to the memory of Jesus in these different places. And so the stones still speak. And the other reason why I selected this title was because of the Easter event. It wasn't too long ago, just last month or a month and a half, 2 months ago, that we celebrated Easter. And as we traditionally do on the Sunday before the Easter Sunday, we celebrate Palm Sunday. And some of you know that I'm fascinated with the Gospel of Luke, primarily because of Luke's audience, whose name is Theophilus. And if you've picked up the book, or if you've heard me speak about this before, or seen a blog that I've written about this, I've been arguing that Theophilus is from Ephesus, and I think I make a very plausible argument for this. But what's interesting about Luke's version of of Palm Sunday, of the triumphal entry, Jesus coming into Jerusalem, is that he gives us details that the other accounts do not. And I think those details are directly connected with the person of Theophilus. So, for example, and I don't know how this connects yet to Theophilus. I'm still thinking about it. But instead of waving palm branches, the people who were welcoming Jesus into Jerusalem spread down their cloaks on the ground, which is a different, well, perhaps an additional thing to them waving palm branches. But they also make this really remarkable declaration which is also unique to Luke's version. And they say, well, they refer to Jesus literally as King and Lord. And that had particular meaning for Theophilus, who understood what it meant to live in a context where there were emperors who were referred to as lords, and to live in a context like Ephesus, which did have a king originally. He understood what that meant. But even more remarkably, is what Jesus says after the Pharisees tell him to quiet those people who are making these declarations of Jesus being a king and a Lord. Jesus responds, and only Luke records this, and he says, let me pull it up here for us. I tell you, if these were silent, the very stones would cry out. And I just found that fascinating. Perhaps it's because I've been so enamored with the world of rocks and archaeology and architecture and so forth, that this really leapt off the page of Luke chapter 19. And I wondered, why was it that Jesus said that? Was it a metaphor? Was it hyperbole? Was he making some sort of other declaration? Or perhaps Luke recorded that, especially for Theophilus, who lived in a context where the names of emperors were declared on stones. The glory of citizens was declared in marble. And names were inscribed that still spoke, and they were meant to be a memory for posterity. And I wondered if perhaps Luke is trying to help Theophilus with an imagination that even Jesus would be remembered in stones. Now, I don't know if that's the case or not. I know there's a good biblical scholar here, Dr. David Pfizer, who might want to correct me at some point. But nevertheless, it does it does incite our imagination to think about Jesus's memory being continued in the stones that we see in the archaeological record. And so that's what I want to speak about tonight. I want to show you 5 archaeological pieces of evidence that continue to declare Jesus in the Middle East and North Africa. And I have just found this very remarkable, to think that his memory continues in these places that are so spiritually dry, if not spiritually dark. And I think there's something here that that we can take away from this, even for ourselves, no matter where we are. If we're in the West, where increasingly, whether it's in Europe, United States, Canada, where the memory of Jesus is fading into obscurity, there might be something here even for us to think about. How do we recover Jesus's memory? So let me get right into this and share these different archaeological pieces. First, the biblical record, the literary record, is a record that we value. And it preserves our beliefs, it preserves narratives, it gives us theology and so forth. It explains our faith. But there is another record, the record of the rocks, if you will, the stones, the record of the places where people lived, that preserve something of the presence of Christianity in different parts of the world. They show us where people prayed. They show us where they gathered. They show us where people etched into marble and drew in charcoal different symbols, and they were marked even by symbols of allegiance in various places. And so archaeology is not merely historical background. It's a material witness to the movement of God. And it fills a missiological gap where the text sometimes falls silent. And so this has been my curiosity over the past few years. And so this evening, we're going to look at several archaeological pieces that are going to help us map what we might refer to as a memory field. What was the breadth of the memory of Jesus in the first, second, third, and even into the fourth and fifth centuries? And so we're going to look at evidence in ancient the Smyrna and Sardis, two cities that are mentioned, of course, in the book of Revelation. We're going to look at really a fascinating piece of evidence in the ancient city of Edessa, which allegedly becomes the first Christian kingdom. We're also going to look at a piece of evidence in the ancient city of Thuga, which is in modern-day Tunisia. And so we'll consider that as well. And then finally, at a piece of evidence in the desert of Jordan. And so we're going to map a memory field here of the evidence for Jesus in these various places. And again, I hope that it's going to be faith affirming. We're going to begin in the ancient city of Edessa. And this takes a little bit of explaining because this is an interesting one. In the 4th century, the church historian Eusebius writes in his church history, especially in the beginning, he is sharing with us the breadth of the witness of the gospel in the world that he knew. And at the end of his first chapter, he talks about having it seems, having visited Edessa, that he goes to the royal archive and he discovers a letter that is written from King Abgar V to Jesus, and a response from Jesus back to the king. Now, let me read the letter to you because it's a fascinating letter and it's not very long. But the letter goes like this, and then I'll explain what scholars think about this letter. It says this: Abgar Uchama the Toparch to Jesus, who has appeared as a gracious Savior in the region of Jerusalem, greeting. I have heard about you and about the cures you perform without drugs or herbs. If report is true, you make the blind see again and the lame walk about. You cleanse lepers and expel unclean spirits and demons. You cured those suffering from chronic and painful diseases and raised the dead. When I heard all this about you, I concluded that one of two things must be true. Either you are God and came down from heaven to do these things, or you are God's Son doing them. Accordingly, I am writing to you to beg you to come to me, whatever the inconvenience, and cure the disorder from which I suffer. I may add that I understand the Jews are treating you with contempt and desire to injure you. My city is very small, but highly esteemed, adequate for both of us. And then there's a reply from Jesus. And it goes like this: Happy are you who believed in me without having seen me. For it is written of me that those who have seen me will not believe in me, and that those who have not seen will believe in me. As to your request that I should come to you, I must complete all that I was sent to do here, and on completing it, must at once be taken up to the one who sent me. When I have been taken up, I will send you one of my disciples to cure your disorder and bring life to you and those with you. And so this was recorded in Eusebius's church history, the first chapter in the 13th, or first book in the 13th chapter. Interesting letter, isn't it? I mean, I just find it fascinating. Now, what do scholars say? Well, scholars that typically will say that this letter is a fraud. It's apocryphal, and that's the consensus view of the letter. Others will say that Eusebius was duped. He was naive. There's still other scholars say that Eusebius had some other sort of political agenda. He wanted to set up Edessa as being the first Christian empire. But for the most part, scholars dismiss this letter completely. Now, there is one scholar, Ilaria Romelli, who recently wrote an article about another letter that is written from Abgar to Tiberius, the Roman emperor, the second Roman emperor. And that is another one of those interesting letters where Abgar writes to Tiberius, upset that the Jews and Pontius Pilate and Herod Antipas were responsible for the crucifixion of Christ. He even in that letter describes the darkness that occurs during the crucifixion. And Tiberius responds and says to Abgar that he is aware of that situation and he is addressing it. And what is interesting about this is Romelli argues that this was a legitimate letter. This letter actually comes from Abgar to Tiberius. It has an understanding of the political context. It understands the time period. There's not much, according to her, that someone could object with. What seems, though, to me is that while she agrees with the Abgar Tiberius letter and its historicity, that she also dismisses the Abgar Jesus letter as being apocryphal. But it doesn't seem like you can really understand the Abgar Tiberius letter without understanding or without having the backdrop of the Abgar Jesus letter. So where does that leave us? Well, where it leaves us is that, as we know in hermeneutical studies of various apocryphal texts, that there is often a hint of truth, a grain of truth that's concealed in these. And as we read the letter from Abgar, it's not exaggerated. It's not something over the top. It seems to fit the historical time period. Abgar has an understanding of Jesus, who he is. The form of the letter is the form of first century epistles. And so there's a lot in it that breathes an air of authenticity. However, we want to be cautious with making any sort of authenticity claim to that letter. Yet, we can say that it contains something of the memory of Jesus. And that memory is in the ancient city of Edessa. Now, the question is, when is there that memory? And that's what we have to wrestle with. Is it a first century memory or is it a fourth century memory? Well, we know with Abgar the ninth that by then Edessa does become a Christian empire, but that's into the third century. And so it could be that the Abgar, the fifth letter, was kind of something that set up the later kingdom to become Christian. There's a lot that we don't know. But what we do know is that there's a memory of Jesus that is retained in a part of the world that isn't in the New Testament. And that's something exciting. Now, a couple pieces here that I wanted to show you. This is the papyrus of the Abgar letter. It's today in Gothenburg. This is a 5th century fragment of that letter, and but what it tells us is the breadth of which this story begins to spread. This letter was discovered in Egypt, and there's an interesting Coptic tradition that holds to the authenticity of the Abgar Jesus correspondence. This stone here, which it's hard to see, I apologize for that, but you can sort of see written on it in Greek a version of this letter. This particular stone was discovered in Ephesus at a house near the Great Theater in Ephesus. And this is an AI rendition of where it might have been. It was a lintel block. And this becomes something common in ancient architecture where people would write things on door jambs. Of course, we know this about Israel, or they would write it on a lintel block. And oftentimes, those were written in those spaces as apotropaic symbols, meaning that they would ward off the evil that might infect the people of a particular home. And this was what that was used for. In fact, we have an example not only in Ephesus, but one in Philippi, where this same letter is written on this lintel block. And we have similar pieces in other parts of the ancient world as well. Now, there is the kind of demonic thing that perhaps that's going on here, but for our purposes and for our interest, what I think is significant here is the breadth to which this story spreads in the ancient world, from Macedonia to Asia Minor to Edessa, Armenia to Egypt. The story is widespread about who Jesus is. And certainly we all today believe what the letter proclaims, that Jesus is a healer. He makes the blind to see, the lame to walk. He cleanses lepers. He expels unclean spirits and demons. He cures those suffering from chronic and painful diseases. Certainly, this is the Jesus who we worship. And his testimony is written in stone and on papyrus, and it spreads throughout the ancient world. That's one piece that I find particularly fascinating. Another piece is found in the market of Smyrna. Smyrna today is modern-day Izmir in Turkey, still a coastal city. It is mostly covered by modern-day Izmir. But there are pieces or places in Izmir where we can see the ancient site that where we know Polycarp lived, for example. Irenaeus might have gone to Smyrna to study with Polycarp. There's a lot of history connected with Christianity in ancient Smyrna. And of course, Jesus writes a letter to Smyrna. The agora was destroyed, I want to say the 6th or 7th century, an earthquake destroyed it. And one of the things that occurred when that happened was that what's called the crypto porticos, the kind of the basement, if you will, of the agora, which was still a place where people would bring their goods and sell their wares and food and so forth. It was completely covered in dirt. And to the surprise and the joy of archaeologists, when they began to excavate it and remove that dirt, they discovered all sorts of graffiti there. And a couple of these pieces of graffiti have been identified as clearly Christian. And I want to highlight just one of them for us this evening. And this is a fascinating one. This is the picture of it. It's written in charcoal, and it is in what we refer to as a tabla asanta. And you can sort of see it here. I'll outline it here. A tabla asanta was just simply an architectural feature that would highlight some special or significant uh, declaration or invocation, perhaps, of someone. This one is drawn just simply in charcoal here, but it signifies that what is in this space is something that somebody felt like was important. And we have two examples of this particular piece of graffiti in the Agora. And from those two examples, we can determine what the words were. But I only want to take the time to highlight one word. All of the words, however, are connected, and they focus on this one word that's at the center. This is what we refer to as a word square. You might remember the famous rotas word square that it goes rotas in one direction and satar in the other direction. This is something similar, although a little bit different, as it's in Greek, not Latin. But this one has at the center, in the form of a cross, the word logos. Here. Now, the other words are melon, hedona, logos, onoma is the fourth one, and heideon. Heideon, I think, is the fifth one. They mean fruit, desire, word, name, and twining or spinning is the last one. All of them, I've argued in my recent book, have Christological significance, particularly the Logos. And with the Logos at the center in the form of a cross, this is certainly a Christian piece of graffito in Smyrna that is declaring something about Jesus as the Logos. Now, we know Ignatius writes a letter to Smyrna as well, and he uses the term Logos in that letter as a designation for Jesus Christ himself. And so we have this other really interesting piece. Now, this particular the piece of graffito is dated to the early 2nd century. So it would have been there at the time of Polycarp. Irenaeus might have seen it as well. And you can imagine in a marketplace where this serves sort of as a puzzle, if you will, that this could be an example of an early evangelistic tool, if not a discipleship tool for people who would come and see and wonder what the meaning of these words were and what the connection was. And so it's an interesting piece of graffiti there that tells us something about what the early Christians believed about Jesus, that his name is above every other name. That in fact, the term melon, the top one, which means fruit, is used in the Song of Solomon and or the Song of Songs. And Origen, when he wrote his commentary on this, made the connection between that fruit being Christ. And so again, all of this Christological significance in these terms. And so in the 2nd century, we have another, if you will, memory of Jesus in the early church that we can see today. You can walk through the crypto porticos of Smyrna and see this still preserved in that ancient city. And so another memory that we have of Jesus. Now, let me go to a third one. This is really, if you've been to Asia Minor, you will recognize this, no doubt, as the synagogue of Sardis. It's a large synagogue, and in its state here, It represents the synagogue in the 4th, 5th, and 6th century. In the 7th century, it was destroyed by the invasion of the Persians. And that's an interesting little piece of history that I think is very helpful for us in being able to identify the significance of this particular building. But one of the things that I've argued, and others have argued as well, is that this probably served multiple purposes, not only as a gathering place of Jews, but also of civic groups, perhaps trade guilds, even, because along the northern side of this building is a number of shops. On the southern side, there's a large gymnasium you can see in the background here. But one of the things that's interesting are several architectural pieces incorporated into this building, and I wanted to highlight just simply one of them, and that's this piece of marble that's on a wall on this side. On this side of the building here, and what I want to highlight, this is a dedicatory inscription. It's referred to as the Regina inscription, and it's just simply an inscription that was placed there by somebody as a memory marker for the gift that they gave to this building. And we don't know exactly what that gift was. We think it could be some of the marble panel on the walls. It could be some artwork. We're not exactly certain, but it was the gift from this person and his wife, Regina, and their children to this building. Now, but they say it's because of the graciousness of this here. This is so cool. In Greek, it's to pantokratoros theou. And when I first saw this, I thought, this is absolutely remarkable because one, this is a theta upsilon with a line above it. It's what we refer to as a nomen sacrum, a sacred name. It was something, as Larry Hurtado has argued in his volume on this subject, it was uniquely Christian. We see it in a number of manuscripts, ancient New Testament manuscripts, and I think even in some Greek Old Testament manuscripts, these similar ways in which people would, or scribes would, abbreviate the name of God. And this is that abbreviation, theou. It's in the genitive form here of theos. And so this is clearly identifying this person as a Christian who has made this gift, who has given this gift to this building in the name of you can't see the pi here, pantokratoros theou. Literally, this means the ruler, God's all ruler. Now, what's significant about that is that the early church referred to Jesus as the Pantokratoros. He is the ruler of all. And this being in this building is a explicit reference to Jesus Christ. Now, I don't know about you, but I love that about this, because this is in the 4th, 5th, and 6th centuries. This space could have been used by believers. Now, we date the inscription probably to the 4th century. It's after the Christianization of the empire, and it would not have been unusual for Christians to either have taken over a space of another religious group, as we know they do in different temples, or that the Jews who had once utilized this space in their worship practice, having become Christians themselves. And so it was a natural place for Christians to gather. But here you have a 4th, 5th, 6th century example of a gathering place that could hold at least 1,000 people, if not more. And that is stunning to consider, the size of the gathering of the community of believers in this particular place. And so that's a third exhibit for us to consider, about the memory of Jesus being preserved in the archaeological record, in the stones, in the ancient world. Here's another one. This is in the ancient city of Thuga. The temple in the background is the Temple of Mercury. And we have begun an archaeological project in North Africa, trying to document where we can signs that Christianity was there. And one of the things that we observe, particularly in Asia Minor, but as my friend Danny Hayes has written in his recent book on the Christogram, we observe this symbol in multiple places all across the Roman Empire. And that symbol was this here that we see highlighted, just simply an 8-spoked wheel. And what that symbol became representative of was Jesus' name in Greek, Isu, Christus. But in addition to that, an identification of who he was, Theos, Jesus Christ, God. This was far more ubiquitous than the fish, the ichthus. This Christogram is a telltale sign that Christianity was there. Now, what's significant about this in North Africa, well, in one sense, it's another one of those clear declarations of Jesus's memory in North Africa. But what it also tells us is something about the arrival of Christianity in North Africa. The symbol, as I mentioned, is very common in Asia Minor. You see it just about in every city except for the city of Pergamum. We've not been able to find one in Pergamum, and that's another story there. But it tells us how Christianity travels. And we know historically that the Christianity that comes to North Africa is a Christianity that came from Asia Minor. And so it is no surprise that we would find a symbol here, a declaration that Jesus Christ is God in the temple complex in the ancient city of Thuga. Now, we know the significance of North Africa. So many great theologians came from there, Tertullian, Cyprian, Augustine, and so forth. And it's something to think that memory still exists there in the stone. Jesus continues to be declared. He's not understood. The symbol's not understood, but it's there. And it marks a memory that continues for us to celebrate today. Finally, this one is, I have not seen this rock yet, but I want to see it. I'm borrowing from the research of Professor Ahmed Al-Jalad. He is an epigraphist from the University of Ohio, or no, wait, I got to get this right because there might be some Ohio State University people on this call. He is from David has given us a thumb down. He is from the Ohio State University. And he's a scholar of pre-Islamic epigraphy. And on one of his archaeological expeditions, he was looking at some graffiti in the desert of Jordan, and he came across this rock. And the letters here that contains many different things here, symbols and letters and so forth, so forth. But the language is Safaedic, and there is an inscription here of the word "sigh," and it's translated like this: "O sigh, help him against those who deny you." So this is clearly an invocation um, uh, to whoever Sai is. Al-Jalad has identified Sai as the pre-Islamic Isa from the Quran. And so here in the Jordan Desert, probably 5th century, might be 4th century, as Al-Jalad has suggested, that there's a declaration of the worship of Jesus in the pre-Islamic period. And it's that name then that is incorporated into the Quran ultimately. And so another memory of Jesus in the Middle East and the ancient world. Fascinating to think about these things as memories that we can recover of Jesus in these places where Christianity has long disappeared. The percentage of Christians in North Africa and the Middle East is minuscule in many places. And yet there still is in the stone a memory of who Jesus is. If only we are able to go and to make that declaration explicit. And so in Edessa, we read about Jesus being a healer. In Smyrna, he's the Logos, he's the Word. In Sardis, he's the sovereign, the ruler of all. In Thuga, he's declared Jesus Christ God. And in Jordan, he's invoked as an object of worship. And so the memory of Jesus is materially embedded. It is literarily embedded as well. But here we're seeing it materially embedded. It's geographically vast, and it survives long after visible movements fade. And one of the wonderful opportunities that I have in the work that I do is working with missionaries in this part of the world to think about, what does this mean for us today? How might we capitalize on the memory of Jesus that's written in stone and help to make that explicit in a place where people have long forgotten who Jesus is? And so the stones are still crying out. A letter from Edessa remembers the healer. The graffito in Smyrna remembers the Logos. A marble panel in Sardis remembers the ruler of all. A symbol in North Africa remembers Jesus as God. And a desert rock in Jordan petitions Isa. The task of missiological archaeology, which is a discipline that a colleague of mine and I are beginning to talk more and more about. How do we use archaeology as a tool in going into some of these places where we can't go and identify where Jesus has been worshipped, and then use that as a way to build relationships and develop conversations with people. And so the task is not merely to uncover the past, it's to listen carefully enough to hear where the stones are still declaring the glory of Jesus Christ. And so the question that I've been asking is, are we still listening? And if we are, how might we make that even more clear to people who have never heard?
Okay, Michael. Now that everybody has listened to you opine about the joys of archaeology, what were maybe some of the thoughts that you had afterwards saying, man, if we had had time, I really would have loved to have talked about this or engage the learners who showed up in this way?
Yeah, we had a good attendance, and I'm grateful for that, and a lot of interest. Yeah, you always want to go into more detail in each of these areas, and it would have been fun to talk more about Smyrna. in the cryptoporticos, because I just mentioned one, the graffito there, and there are a couple others that are equally interesting and also point to Jesus. And those I talk about in the book as well.
Yeah.
I think, the one in Sardis, the Pantokratoros inscription is really a remarkable inscription, and it'd be fun to talk about other pieces of evidence that are pointing to that so-called synagogue being used by Christians. That would have been fun to talk about. But the three that aren't in the book are especially interesting as well. The letter of Akbar the Fifth to Jesus. We're always going to debate the apocryphal nature of that letter, but as we know, and as I mentioned, there's always some grain of truth even in apocryphal literature. And we certainly see that in this letter. And what's impressive about that letter is just the geographical breadth that we see. I mean, we have copies of it from Egypt, Armenia, Turkey, of course. And so there's just a wide breadth of geography that's represented in that letter and that tradition. And then the let's see, I'm missing one, aren't I? The one in North Africa, the Christogram. I make a comment in the book about this because when we discovered it, we were looking at it and just amazed that it was there, because it's such a prevalent symbol, that Christogram, especially in Asia Minor, but in other places as well. But when we were looking at it, a tour group was walking by, and I stopped the tour guide and I asked him, "Do you know what this is?" And he just looked at it and said, "Oh, that's just a sundial," and walked on. He didn't want to have any conversation about it. But it was so fascinating because when you meet these things in Asia Minor, even the tour guides know that that's a Christogram. And yet in North Africa, it wasn't acknowledged at all. And then the last one, the rock that was discovered in the desert of Jordan, I think we're going to find more of those sorts of things. We're only at the beginning of archaeological discoveries on the Arabian Peninsula, and that's pretty exciting to think about what's going to come down the road here before too long.
This is exciting. I participated on the front end of the seminar. Listeners, this is me tattling on myself. I had to actually duck out because I had a meeting, and I got off the seminar and shut it down. And then at the start of my next meeting, I was just kind of buzzing with excitement and telling my friends, I was like, yeah, but then there was this letter to Akbar, or from Akbar to Jesus, and it's kind of apocryphal, but at the same time, like I was trying to repeat what I had just learned, which means that's the most dangerous somebody can be, with just a shred of information. And I was really excited. So I will tell you, as a participant in that seminar, it was really fascinating to just kind of see all the ways that Jesus has made an impact. He is not just a fanciful notion of a group of hopeful people who wanted to make a savior. He was real. He had a historical impact, and it was very, very wide reaching. And I mean, yes, obviously we're still talking about him today, but seeing the proximity and the closeness of that impact is always fascinating. And encouraging.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's faith, it's faith building and encouraging for sure.
Yes. Well, listeners, I think Michael and I have been blessed that you joined us on this podcast today, that you have participated in a way with that seminar. But we don't want to take too much of your time. We are just honored that you gave it to us today. And so as always, there are things that we are doing and continuing to do, and those are available in a larger degree at our Ephesiology masterclasses. So go online to masterclasses.ephesiology.com. See what some of those courses are that we offer. Some are free, some are paid. And there's a really cool opportunity if you go and buy the book for more information, more things that you can participate in with a little code that's in the book that'll unlock some extra fun for you. So really do encourage you, go grab Michael's latest book, God's... I screw this title up every time. Michael, what's the title of your book?
God's Emperors, Philosophers, and a New Movement.
Okay, so it's the philosophers that catch me up every time. I get gods and emperors, and then I forget philosophers, and then by the time of a new movement, I'm toast. So go and look that book up. Go check it out. When you purchase it, there is a code in there for you to actually access even more material for free. So thank you for your time. Thank you for doing theology and community with us today on the Ephesiology Podcast.